Welcome to the Art Miabo podcast. I'm your host, Gift Nyadike. Once upon a time, we were known as the Art Miabo International Art Festival podcast because we exclusively covered the yearly editions of the festival, the organizers, and the participating artists. But as the brand grows and the interest and impact of African art grows, we felt the show needed to grow too. And there is no better way to showcase that growth than with my guest at this time. He is one of the most prominent attorneys in Nigeria, having operated in the gaming, technology, sports, media, and e-commerce spaces. He is the founder of the law firm, Law Alliance, and the co-founder of one of the biggest record labels in Africa, Chocolate City. Most importantly, he is the sitting president of the Nigerian Esports Federation, Mr. Yahaya Mekori. Sir, thank you for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me here.
Now, I know I've given the audience the cliff notes, but could you please, in a bit more detail, introduce yourself for those who may be a bit unfamiliar with you?
Okay, thank you. What do I have to say? My name is Yahaya. Once again, I'm from Kaduna State, northern part of Nigeria. I'm a lawyer, graduated from Ife, a reluctant lawyer actually. But yeah, I've been practicing law for the past almost 30 years. And I chose entertainment law to be a key focus of my practice. In the course of that journey, I found myself dabbling into other entrepreneurial pursuits. Sometimes you might call them hobbies, but they are generally along the lines of the creative industry and how they intersect with technology. So I'm a professional lawyer. I've been practicing for the past 20 years. I've been involved in gaming on an entrepreneurial level, music. Now I'm into film, poetry, and music. So these are all stuff that I find very exciting, and they complement my area of specialization.
Like you said at the beginning there, a reluctant lawyer. Could you perhaps go into a bit more about your professional journey and why reluctant? That word specifically.
Okay, reluctant in the first sense that my father was a lawyer himself, and he desperately wanted his first son to be a lawyer, to take after him, right? That wasn't my dream at first. And for the first 10 years, I never practiced law. I wanted nothing to do with law. Actually, found out that I had no choice but to go back there as a means of survival, right? But of course, that also changed my perspective on how I was going to practice law. I wasn't going to practice law the traditional way people were known to practice law. I was always going to look at it from the adventurous part of it, the exciting part of it, as well as use it as a basis for my other engagements. So I call it reluctant because it wasn't my first love initially, and I didn't intend to for the first 10 years. I eventually jumped on it when that seemed like the only platform I had to make a decent living.
You want to talk adventurous? Let's talk about 2 years ago, 2024. The documentary that you released with a past guest on the show, Mr. Ed Chiesa, Wayham, a son of Ham investigates Africa's oldest civilization. That documentary was featured at that year's AMIA festival, The Sculptor's Odyssey. The documentary, you yourself narrated not just the history, but the achievements, technological and artistic, of Nok culture. And of course, you yourself, you are part of the Ham tribe, which was the focus of the documentary. But I wanted to ask specifically about, after these 2 years, how has your understanding of Nok culture evolved, both as a member of the tribe and just, as a personal passion for you and interest? And, what new developments or conversations around Nok preservation and research have stood out to you since then, if any?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I have to actually commend Art Miabo because that's where the idea of the documentary was hatched. It wasn't really a thing. It wasn't even the horizon. It was a chance meeting between Mr. Onyadike and that spewed that conversation. Of course, things move very quickly. And in 5 days, we had already signed an agreement to do a documentary. And for me, that was a journey of personal discovery. I knew a lot about the Ham, the Nok people. I've read so much about them, but I never even had gone to the caves, right? I had never really gone deep down to investigate what this culture was all about, aside from what I'd read on the book by Brenda Fike and, of course, word of mouth. And some of the small features and some of the documentaries, of course, produced by foreigners. So for me, getting involved in that project basically gave me a deeper understanding of what this was all about. I mean, for me, when we were filming, especially when we went to the caves, we met with the chiefs, the custodians of this past civilization. It was an out-of-body experience, if you ask me. It was more like us communing with my ancestors. I had a deeper understanding. It was an out-of-body experience and probably one of the most exciting adventures I've embarked on. And of course, that took us to like 3 different continents. We were in Frankfurt, we were in London, I was in Connecticut, Yale University Museum, apart from other interviews we have conducted across Nigeria. Initially, I didn't really have a foresight into what will come out of this, what will morph out of this. I think so many things have come out since that process started. First things first, we got a grant from the U.S. Embassy to help renovate the Nok Museum in Nok. Right, the museum in Nok is a national museum,
Yes.
but it really has no artifacts there. In a dilapidated state, no lighting. All they had was just framed pictures there to try to kind of simulate a typical Nok, what the Nok Museum should be like, or what the Nok art has been. But they saw the value of what we were doing, and they put in some money for us to help renovate that museum. And I think apart from just renovating it, we're able to also curate some kind of Nok architecture there to add more experience, to extend the experience for anybody going there. So obviously, I think we have a well-lit, kept museum now that can really host lots of people. I need to also add that the chief, or Pope Ham, which is the paramount ruler of the Ham people himself, had made provision for a location for the building of a Nok museum, which is something we're working on now. But I think the endorsement from the U.S. Embassy kind of put some kind of validation in what we're doing. Yes, and we are already discussing so many other institutions who are looking at what kind of grants they can give us. We've applied for a couple of grants. We had so many discussions. Even the screening of the documentary, locally here speaking, we've gotten lots of offers for people who want to partner with us to screen the documentary. Because there's lots of travel involved in the process, we just finalized it, and we're about to start going on the screening tour, right, in Europe, US, and we'll probably end up in Nigeria. We'll probably start in Nigeria, I'll go to Europe and the US for most of this year. But I think there's been a cultural awakening amongst the Ham people. The way Ham actually means son of Ham. Ham people are the people who predominantly occupy the areas where most of the artwork was found. Ham, which is a way of saying, he's one of us. He's one of us. Has now become like a catchphrase at home now. We have lots of memorabilia being produced with Ham. We believe that the merchandising on its own, eventually, by the time we're finished going the rounds, will turn out into be a multi-million-dollar undertaking for us. In terms of the awareness, I think for people, the younger people who never heard about it or heard about it in passing, and I kind of heard that years ago, history, they stopped teaching history in university in some of the Nigerian institutions. I think for those who have missed out on that.
Really?
Yeah, wow. I heard so. I'm not sure, but for those who missed out on that, that period, this is an opportunity for them to reconnect.
That's very unfortunate,
right? Yes, and just talk about Nok. People do not even know the cultural significance of the Nok people. First of all, it's probably the oldest or the first civilization to have used iron in the whole of Africa. In some other documentary, I noticed that they said they're probably the first in the world, next only to the Turkish Empire, right? So it's not just a sub-Saharan African achievement; it is really a global achievement. In terms of the terracotta
global achievement, yes.
Yeah, in terms of the terracotta heads probably has the most pervasive artwork across the world as well, because it covers about 100,000 square kilometers, right? From Kaduna to Plateau to Benue to Niger State, right? While obviously it seems that most of the clay came from one spot, but the work was found in this whole over across four different states in Nigeria. What the work was for, again, remains to be found, right? Whether it was for simply religious, or were they treating the artwork or what? But obviously, at some point, we can only generalize or conclude that it was really an advanced society. Because
Speculate, I guess.
yeah, those artifacts showcase what happened 3,000 years ago. You could see them with braids, beautiful braids, necklaces, bracelets, and making such kind of production is only just really a reflection of what happened then, an issue that they were not even basic subsistence lifestyle. Were at an advanced level that had gone into the process of this kind of breakthroughs in terms of technology and this kind of artwork, which is still a thing of marvel today. So what are we hoping to achieve with the documentary? We're hoping that we can bring that, reawaken people as to this civilization and see how we can generate more support in terms of research. Because the only extensive research that happened was by Professor Brunin for 8 years until funding ceased. And I think it's over 10 years since anybody has returned there to undertake any serious research.
10 years. Imagine the work that could have been done in that time. Yeah, that is all truly amazing, actually. Earlier, you discussed the state of the Knock Museum previously, and it's just complete lack of artifacts and them having to almost subsidize that with framed photos. I think you can agree there's been a growing momentum, especially recently over the last few years, globally about the return of African artifacts, like bringing them back to the continent and just returning cultural heritage. As the president of the Esports Federation and your interests and time in gaming, you might even be familiar with I'm currently based in South Africa. So there was a video game that came out recently called Relooted. It's an Afrofuturist heist game where your character must break into these Western museums and steal back certain cultural artifacts that had been stolen during colonization and the like. Out here in the real world, when it comes to Knock artifacts in particular, how would you honestly assess, the current state of the repatriation efforts? You have obviously mentioned the grant that you received from the U.S. Embassy. What still needs to happen, for communities of origin, the people who this art, who this culture, all of these items belong to? What needs to happen for them to regain ownership, not just to physically possess them?
I think there are lots of things. Thanks for that question. There's a whole lot that needs to go into it. First of all, we need to look at the law, right? It's something we, even as a law firm, we considered at a very, very extensive level. But the laws did not give us the kind of powers without working with government. And the problem with working with government as well as the issue of bureaucracy, right? Being able to get them to respond at the right kind of speed in certain instances. In terms of repatriation, we know that a couple of repatriations have happened. Some have surrendered some of the work, some have returned some of the work. In the course of our filming the documentary, we spoke to the paramount ruler himself, Cobham, Mr. Danladi Gedmode. He complained that some of the works that have been returned, at least 2 or 3 of those, have been returned by the French government. But after the reception for the handing over, they don't know where the work is. Right? So they don't know where it is. Now, most of those stuff really belong to the National Museum Commission. That's where they own most of those works. Now, the Knock art, by the way, is in every museum in Nigeria. And you'd be surprised how much of that work is out there. So in terms of repatriation, we also need to look at the law in the sense that how do we want to engage, right? Is it government working on its own, or is it the community working on it with the government? You understand? I think most of the communities, they would like to have these properties back in their custody.
Yes.
It has to become some kind of shared responsibility between the federal government through the commission and the communities.
Yes.
Most of the work that the museums actually have are not on display. We don't have sufficient space to display those things, and we don't have up-to-date facilities that would even store them in a very in a safe condition, because the safety is important. The way you store them is important. The space is important. We still have museums which are far from what you can call a contemporary museum, right? So most of them are not in the space because we don't have sufficient space. Even when you have the space, the facilities to basically display them the way it should be. So I think from what I got the last time, the government was trying to look at how the communities and the federal government could have a shared responsibility in terms of this work. I think once we have that kind of understanding, then we can see a much more aggressive desire or aggressive effort to recover most of those stolen work. It's very hard. Again, that's really a different sphere entirely in terms of recovery of artwork because of some of the complications. Most of those artworks are in private collections, so you probably don't even know where they are. And some of them, knowing that they
Yes.
cannot prove the provenance of those works, would never display them. Right. The artwork, deals, there's a black market of the artwork where things are happening on the ground. So there's a whole lot that needs to be said in terms of that. Yeah, but there are lots of museums who have these. Their provenance, we need to investigate that. But again, like I said, the law is not supportive of that kind of undertaking. And I think some people have also asked, why do we want to even recover some of these works when we cannot properly safekeep them? Why are we in a rush? They're probably better where they are than coming to.
Yes, I actually remember that being, I think around 2016, 2017, thereabout, where I remember just like this very loud thing of, give our stuff back. You mentioned the French government. I believe they were one of several European governments who were like, no, we're not going to give it back because we don't, because if we give this stuff back to you, it might disappear.
Oh, yeah.
And I know some people were obviously offended by that because, how dare you? But at the same time, can you refute them logically?
True. But that's what you're saying. At the end of the day, why is a local thing, but really we're all custodians of it. The world is a custodian of it because
yes,
in terms of anthropology, also, trying to trace the evolution of the Homo sapiens and the way they've grown, inhabited, and dominated this earth, it's important that every piece of history is preserved for the bigger picture.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to talk about, I feel like it's been a very slow thing that I've been noticing, at least, and maybe you've been noticing it as well. But there has been a greater interest in these ancient African civilizations. You yourself, you discovered the Noks through word of mouth, through your own research, and it eventually led to the creation of the documentary Wayham. So as interest in these ancient African civilizations grow, there's also increasing exposure through media, like again, the documentary, tourism, actually like people actually going to the museum, going to Nok, going to Kaduna State, the areas, and even commercial adaptation, that being film, TV, video games, etc. Do you think that the current global interest in these cultures, Nok included especially, does it help preserve the legacy, or is there a risk of it being diluted or misinterpreted as it becomes more visible? Because that does tend to happen a lot, especially when an older culture or older religion or older mythology becomes popular. It kind of gets lost in translation, and you end up with versions that are far removed from what actually existed. You see that with Greek mythology a lot, for example.
Yeah, so but what you're saying is true, because at the end of the day, word of mouth at the end of the day moves faster than any other kind of source of information, isn't it? And we're in a media era, technology-driven media era right now, whereby people are making different spin-offs of even the Nok art. I've seen people who interpret the Nok art in their own contemporary ways. Now it depends on the accident of history, which one survives what, right? If the person making his own variations or derivatives of the Nok art is lucky that his story either survives or out survives the real original work, then probably that will become the real historical information people will run with. But having said that, the only way you can preserve this is this research and museum and research, where these things are properly documented and they can become the actual source for any kind of information coming from there. But the community needs to own that. That is part of what we're doing with the documentary and with the foundation as well. The foundation really is to aggregate all resources belonging to the Han people, more particularly in regards to Nok culture, in terms of research, documentation, and also storytelling. We also believe that the culture needs to be told in a much more contemporary way. They've spoken about the Relooted, the program we have there. We also have a game we have developed, which is really people going to the caves. We're trying to recreate the topography of the Nok people, of the Nok place. People can go in there. It's an
Yeah,
immersive
that's amazing. That's
installation
incredible.
whereby you can actually, you yourself can see yourself going into the caves looking for artwork that buried deep insight and trying to figure out the hieroglyphics that still remain there, trying to decipher the language and other stuff like that. So there's no way it can remain on its own 100% pure. You're going to have dilution from here to there. But what's most important is that the fundamental story of the Nok people and their achievements is kept and preserved in a way whereby it becomes a fallback resource for any kind of innovation or storytelling or improvement on what they achieved. Stories will be told, and stories will be told according to perspective and perception as well. Those are the same story with the same original story, but people will tell you based on their own perception of it, how they conceive it. Yeah.
And you ended up answering what would have been my final question, that being, what would a truly African-led future for Nok research, preservation, and storytelling look like in practical terms? You basically outlined everything for me. Mr. Yahaya Mekori, thank you once again so much for your
My
time.
pleasure.
I want to wish you the best of luck in your screening
Thank you
tour
very
around
much.
the world.
My pleasure.
Hi. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you
bye.
very much.
Enjoy.
If you enjoyed this conversation, sir, please leave a like, a share, subscribe. Follow Art Miabo on platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And you'll find this podcast on YouTube and Spotify and wherever else you should find your podcasts. See you all next time.